Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. I recently went through a round of decluttering and space clearing and generally trying to go through everything that I own and see if it is really a good contemporary fit for who I am now. And I'll be honest, it kind of sucked. So for me, years ago, I came across the life-changing magic of tidying up and Marie Kondo's information, and I really resonated with this vision of having our belongings be really contemporary. And I went through the process of doing that, and every few years, I start to have this low-level craving to really go through, release things that no longer serve, come into really good alignment. I have a finite amount of storage space. It's by no means a small amount, but there's this process by which I accumulate things faster than they leave. We all have that cognitive bias of sunk cost bias and whatnot. So it's a lot easier just how we're wired as humans to bring things in and acquire new things than it is to let go of things that we misjudged how much they would serve us or align with us or how much we would end up using them. Kitchen appliances, they're all these like super cool things, and sometimes you have the thing where you're like, this has been so useful, and other times you have the like, I don't know why I thought I needed a special doodad for doing the special thing. But I digress. So usually my process, I spend some time longing for this, but then life is really full with other things, and then the desire grows and grows and grows, and eventually I embark on this, huge process. And one of the things that's just sort of true about my personality is I tend to like big projects more than I like sustained effort. So kudos to everyone who's like, yeah, I just actively, pick a aspect of my life and do this periodically, and it's very manageable. For me, it works better to have the passion build up until it crosses into enough motivation to carry me through. And again, I'll be really honest, I didn't have this like happy couple of weeks where I was systematically evoking, discipline and determination to make this happen. I wish I could say that, I was really inspired. I think that for me, there's a part of it that's really inspired, but the cumulative effect of all of the different areas and all of the different things, eventually it kind of feels like a slog. I was super grateful to one of my friends who helped me with the kitchen. She came over for a few hours and helped me out and kept me on task, and that was an incredible boon, something that I really, really appreciated. But one of the things that makes this a little bit hard and complicated is I'm not a minimalist. I think, minimalism can be really elegant and really attractive, and there's an ease of keeping things really clean and clear if that's what speaks to you. But for me, one of the aspects of things that's just true of me is I have a lot of tendency toward craftiness, and not in the scheming kind of way, although perhaps sometimes that, but more in the I do beadwork. Years ago, I made a bunch of candles. I sew things. I've had quilting projects. And in fact, in the middle of this whole addressing of my space and going through everything I owned, I realized that one of the things that was impacting me is not having my room be dark enough, especially as the season was changing from winter into spring and subsequently summer. So I took on the project of blocking the light that was streaming in through the top of the curtains by building the valance box to go along the top. And I pulled out old foam that I had and batting from quilting projects and my sewing machine, and in the middle of it created this, structure that was really cool and really satisfying. And I loved having so much of the supplies I needed to custom build this thing, out of leftover foam from when I insulated my cold plunge. And so for me, the availability of things that can engage with projects, the fact that what kind of clothes I might want to wear varies a lot, from the very casual and comfortable to having some dresses that I really liked. But at the same time, it's really useful to go through and look at the supplies and fabrics that I'm not actually going to use. For the candles, I haven't played with candles in a long time, so I was letting go of decade-old essential oils that probably weren't super premium for the kind of energetics that I wanted to weave together should I take up candles again. So all of this is to say that the aligned contemporary, what it looks like, doesn't necessarily have a volume of belongings. I think that we tend to get overwhelmed by things that we have, not go through things out of inertia. Some years ago, I helped my parents prepare for downsizing and a big move, and we were literally throwing away backpack equipment that they had from before I was born. And fortunately, they weren't borderline hoarders. They didn't look like hoarders because they had an enormous house with a lot of storage space. But when you got into like the volume of stuff, it was spectacular. And it wasn't attachment in their case. It was just inertia, where they were so overwhelmed with going through their things that months and months passed. So I made these trips up to Northern California to hold up my parents' belongings sort of one by one and put them into the save or release pile, and the vast majority of things went into the release pile. So a lot of times we end up with extra things that were complete with the relationship. And again, it's nice to know that our brain has the sunk cost bias. So, we can end up hanging on to things even when we're really complete with them. Sometimes there's complexity of attachment of wanting the value to be carried forward. So one of the crafty things I tried is called diamond art painting. And you basically just put little tiny plastic pieces into dots to create an image, which is very meditative and relaxing and a great thing to do with an audiobook in the background. It gets some of the oxytocin of repetitive motion. So, lots of good things, but I did it for a while, hadn't picked it up again, felt complete. But of course, I'd acquired all the stuff, and it was very satisfying to put that on my local Buy Nothing group and have it go to somebody who was about to have hip replacement surgery. But there was also, of course, more overhead to having this, not just dumped off at a thrift store to take its chances, but to be passed along as a kit to someone who might use it. So there are lots of ways that we can kind of get tripped up. In the beginning, I was putting things that I thought the community would like on Buy Nothing, and by the end, between, the one random person who didn't pick up and the bad communicator and, people who were communicating in ways I didn't much enjoy, I was like, I'm just over it. This whole pile is just going to Goodwill. Even if I think my neighbors would like it, I'm complete. So all of this is to say, kind of long way around, when it comes to this process, I think it's really useful to honor whatever really works for you. So I just want to give everybody permission, if things end up in a landfill and they're not taking up space in your life, that's still a win. There's a big complicated question of how we use landfills, and sure, it's better if it goes to a thrift store or somebody who can make use of it. But at the same time, I think we can have some guilt and shame and complicated energy that gets in the way of just dealing with things in the most efficient way possible. My grandparents had just an enormous amount of stuff that they accumulated. And they had this 3-car garage that had like my long past great grandmother's vacuum from the 60s and old worn out luggage and, just so many things. And they couldn't keep their cars in the garage because of this great tower of boxes with these little narrow walkways. And in the end, the solution was to gather family members, rent a dump truck, pull it up, and just go through systematically and harvest the very small amount that would be useful. Any family member, speak up now. And I'm sure there were things that like could have sold on eBay of, vintage dishes and, cool things. But there was an efficacy to people traveling at distance with really busy lives. And this was the time and the energy that was available to deal with that. So I think it's really useful to kind of take a deep breath and really hold the vision of what works rather than necessarily what's most elegant. And that your contemporary truth about your relationship to your belongings might not look like anyone else's. I really love being able to be creative on the fly without having to wait for something to show up or go out and acquire something. And so I have a lot of storage space devoted to being able to engage with that at the drop of a hat when it next cycles around and is really alive for me. But for me, one of the indicators that it would be really supportive to do this is when I feel like my things start to press in on me. So I remember a child of the 80s, the very early little Game Boys where you could play Tetris. And I played Tetris for way too many hours in a row of, dropping these shapes into lines where they all fit together. And when my home starts to be a game of Tetris where I'm doing an excellent job of stacking things so there's no air between them, it can start to feel a little bit overcrowded. And that going through this process is really useful. And on the other side of it, so I had, the luxury, honestly, of some uninterrupted time where I didn't have a lot of demands so that I could just really tear apart my house. I live alone, so the living room could be devoted as a staging area and not particularly inconvenience anyone. And there was, something really, really wonderful about being able to just delve in and go through. But I was also, really, really grumpy and really over it and really, working with the embrace the suck, keep going. And on the other side of this, it's freed up so much life force energy. So having, literally hundreds of pounds of stuff that, I gave away in various pathways, and all of my storage spaces having breathing room. There's extra space in my various closets. I reset my energetic grid with all of my crystals. This contemporary alignment, there's been this freeing up of my life force energy that I'm noticing in a particularly potent way. So part of that is just, being really glad that on my mental to-do list, none of the things are, I should really go through that bin I have outdoors and, put on gloves so I can be protected from spiders as I do so. So of course that provides some relief, the knocking off of dreaded tasks. We're all generally really good procrastinators, and doing the thing you don't want to do and getting to the other side provides its own form of relief and reward. But more than that, just on an energetic level, being able to cleanse my space and set the energy and then feel this quality of inspiration and motivation that's bubbling up. So some of the other things of, wow, how do I want to take care of my body in this phase of life? Where do I want to travel next? What else do I want to align and optimize? Where is this upwelling of passion and inspiration and motivation and the ability to take right action in response to all of these things has been really rewarding. I've really enjoyed. I like when those qualities are at a good solid simmer, and it's difficult when the level of that drops and I'm not feeling a lot of inspiration or creativity or desire to engage with things. And sometimes, it's good to be in the yin and have the rest and sort of let the energy bubble up. But one of the things I want to mention that's sort of the catch-22 of being an energetically sensitive psychic person is that really getting like all of your belongings, everything has its own innate energy signature. And so with all the rocks I have collected, there's a lot of working with them to, ask them to not only have their wonderful own innate energy, but to recognize that they're part of a grid and to harmonize that in a way that doesn't have someone walking into my house and having their hair stand on end because they're in this vortex of overwhelming amounts of energy. All of these different things, some things have more energy. And then on top of that, there's the energetic meaning. So humans love to make meaning of things. So for example, I have very beautiful china tea sets, teacups and saucers from both of my grandmothers. And I get a kick out of having those. I love having those. And they are things that I find innately beautiful in their own right, but the energy of knowing that it represents a connection to these women in my life that, have this legacy that builds things in my life to this day, gives them special meaning. And so when there's pleasure in the meaning that we've imbued, that's great, but there can be embarrassment that we've so had to have the semi-expensive kitchen appliance and we used it 3 times, if that, and never touched it again, or the association with the ex who gave us the thing, or, so many signatures. So what's really hard about the energetically sensitive person is it's even more expensive. I think if you talk to the general population, there's a lot of satisfaction in having decluttered, but the enjoyment of decluttering for yourself, there are just not a lot of people who really get a kick out of it. It can even be satisfying to help someone else when you don't have all of those energetic relationships. But for yourself, it can be this really difficult kind of thing. There's a lot of challenge to stay really present because we kind of want to sweep over piles of papers or stacks of things or stuff that's on hangers and generalize. And that's legit. We can do that. But if we're really attempting to get really contemporary with each thing, we really kind of have to pick it up and look at it, pile together. For example, I have a love of fancy dresses, even though I seldom wear them. But I ended up sort of through various means acquiring a whole stack, and ones that I liked before, now that I have better upgrades, those could go because they just aren't as resonant for me as some of the other ones. And without going through and trying them all on, it wasn't clear to me which should go. And when I did it with looking at them all at the same time and trying them on, it made the process incredibly crystal clear, which is, a wonderful thing. Side note, the guides want me to drop in, if you have changed weight and are optimistic about being a weight that you were previous and have some very select clothes that you would, just adore but don't fit you right now, putting them in some kind of long-term storage. I don't mean you have to rent a storage unit, but for me, I carefully folded up some things that fall into that category, and I put them in one of those vacuum seal bags and then outside in an outdoor storage bin, just so that I'm hanging on to them. I may or may not ever wear them again, but they're not taking up space actually in my closet. So I'm not looking at things that won't actually work. The guides wanted that in there for someone. So if you're that person, hopefully that's a supportive tip for you. Back on the subject of decluttering for energetically sensitive people, when we start pulling everything out of a closet, we bring these sort of dormant, stored energies into the middle of the room. And there's a really important analogy for this, and I think it's important for personal growth and healing. When we do something healing and we feel not so great afterwards, sometimes that means that there was a misalignment. But one of the things particularly that I see when I do soul retrieval or shamanic healing is I get a lot of collateral healing for myself and my clients, which I absolutely love. However, when we have like really old stuck energy and it's anchored really deep in our bodies or in our chakras, sacral chakras a lot of times have a lot of old emotions that we didn't deal with, and we clear those out, we feel them most keenly when they get at the outer edge of our auric field when they're about to release. Because just like our physical anatomy, our fingertips have a lot more sensors for sensation and pressure and information than the skin on our back, for example. There's that interesting thing where you can touch two places, and if you get your fingers close enough together, it'll feel to the person like there's only one place that they're being touched. There's just less information being gathered than our fingertips. And similarly with our auric field, the stagnant, stuck energy that's deep in our auric field, we don't get a lot of information about, but when it's in motion, it can feel really heavy. So that's where having a repertoire as an energetically sensitive person of really good shamanic hygiene practices, or energetic hygiene practices, I should say, are way better for just being able to cleanse and clear your energy. So when you're going through kind of a detox of old energy and everything gets really heavy, you can take a salt bath, you can smudge yourself, you can, go walk in nature with an intention that the energy washes over you, and you can offload things that no longer serve. And similarly, when we do space clearing, we want to do the energetic version as well as the physical version. So when you pull out all of these things and stuff that has been, worn at other times and whatnot. Side note, when I wash my bedding, I periodically wash all of my bedding, whether it needs it or not. I also, when I wash my sheets, I add a little bit of salt to the wash for the extra clearing, because there's so much psychic activity in the night and things being reorganized and changed. And periodically, I'll even get rid of all of my bedding, if I've had it for 8 or 10 years, even if I really like that particular comforter, it's just like, wow, that's just sort of imbued with old psychic energy. So it can be really useful to tune in, even with things that you really, really enjoy, that just have a signature of having been something you've participated with for a really long time. This is kind of a more advanced, resetting of energy, but there's so much power in supporting ourselves in a whole variety of ways, of being really contemporary with ourselves, being really up to date, being really present with who we are today. And our belongings can really factor into that, sometimes in a really unseen and passive way. Another side note, when decluttering happens, I think it's useful to expect that we'll have regret about some of the things we release. And if we just accept that we're going to be like, 90-95% accurate, and there'll be like 5% of things that we end up rebuying or replacing or acquiring, or having more sentimental attachment than we realized and being a little bummed about that. And that's okay. Like that balance is okay. It can be really freeing from having to get it all right. You just have to, you're just striving to get it mostly right, or right enough, rather than being able to perfectly future predict how future you will feel about all of the things that have gone away. And the notion that emotions can be dealt with, emotions are transitory, they move through, can be really helpful, because it can feel like if we end up realizing we're sentimentally attached to an object, there wouldn't be a process by which we could come into peace with its absence from our world. And, again, moderation can be really useful. So I think it's helpful if you don't take on someone else's view, like, oh, this person is a minimalist, so I should be a minimalist. And just explore, just have this be research and development where you learn about yourself. There's so much diversity for how we can do belongings, and I think it's really useful to take advantage of that. Like, I'm in awe of the Detour duo. They're a couple that has a travel channel, and they just moved to Albania because they could have access to all this travel in Europe while having a nice home base with their cat. And they managed to take like 2 checked bags and 2 carry-on bags that still include all of their camera gear for running this channel. And that is just a amazing thing to me, and I see so much freedom in it. And it's very much not my model. I'm not a, I'm going to go somewhere for a week and only take a carry-on bag kind of gal. But that's just kind of my relationship. There's some security blanket of comfort and options and choices that work really well for me. So I just kind of embrace the suck of having more luggage to manage. And when I travel, I try to do a little bit of slow travel, so I'm not changing places I'm staying every night. I try to settle in for at least 2 or 3 nights in a given location so that there isn't so much onerousness to the amount of stuff that I want to pack. So all of this is to say that you do you is a very important part of this, and getting curious about what would be really aligned for you rather than someone else's model is really valuable. Accepting that if you embark on really getting contemporary, really having all of your belongings support the version of who you are now in a really up-to-date, aligned way, that it's likely to really suck, especially if you have a lot of stuff built up. You can play with, bribing people to come over and help you, or doing a little bit at a time, or watching YouTube videos for tips and tricks, because, a lot of people have this problem. So there's a lot of organized human inspiration and possibilities and hacks and approaches at our fingertips. We don't have to brainstorm all of this. And the process can be really difficult. I would just say, as someone who's listening to this podcast, add in the notion that if it's something really heavy, you might, be smudging every, half hour. You might even set an alarm to take a break, to smudge yourself, to smudge the things that have come out. There's a feng shui remedy where you have Epsom salts and you pour like 50% isopropyl alcohol. You need a really good trivet underneath because this gets really hot, and you burn it. It doesn't give off smoke, but it's a very, very, very good space clearing kind of thing. So leaning on the tools of items that will do the heavy lifting of space clearing without you having to do it yourself with your intention and focus can be really useful, of being able to, not walk away from burning fire, but kind of stand back and let it do its work, and really, really supporting yourself with that can make a big difference. And some of it, I think, is just the acceptance that the cost and the overhead and the impact of space clearing is bigger for people who are psychic and energetically sensitive, but the payoff is also so much bigger. And as someone who's on the introverted side, who, really loves, I talk about days I get to stay in my lair, and there's something really nourishing for me about that. Putting the attention and energy and having my space be so aligned and contemporary and up to date and supportive and delicious, and a place that I love being, and being able to enjoy the things that I have. When we're behind on this, it can feel like things are talking to us like, you should straighten this, you should clean this up. And when things are more aligned, and I'm by no means an ultra tidy person, although I get more and more tidy, I think, as years go by, and I have more balance and alignment in my life, but there's more likely for me to get sucked into the beauty of something. So picking up a, piece of opalized petrified wood that, is this little 1/4 of an inch kind of thing, and turning it around and looking at the sparkles and having, a moment of wonder, I'm way more likely to participate with the things that I have, that I enjoy, that I've curated, that I've brought into my life deliberately. And I think that there's, just so much support. And I know in other places I talk about wards and energetic protections and filters. I think that that's really important. Space clearing and energetic hygiene is really important. But thinking of it not only for your own energy body and yourself, but your space is really useful. And it's also useful to recognize that it's a lot easier to do space clearing for someone else than yourself. So don't hesitate to reach out for support. This is something I offer as an add-on for sessions sessions when I work with people, but I have a feeling that if you go online, there are probably people who offer really affordable distance space clearing that can be really helpful. And again, having tools that really do the work where you can be like, all right, I've just set up the feng shui fire remedy, it's going to do its thing, and I'm going to stand here, and then I don't have to do the heavy lifting is really supportive. So I hope that there's some inspiration in here. I hope also that the part where it can genuinely be tedious and exhausting and annoying, and you can end up like for me, when I do space clearing, I have a lot of arguing with myself about the next step. So I might spend 10 minutes arguing with myself, and then 5 minutes, actually engaging with the thing that I've argued with myself. That's toward the bad end of it, when I'm really, really over it, but still just so committed to getting to the other side. But we really have to kick our brains out of power saver mode. There's a lot of complexity to genuinely feeling into things and making sure they're contemporary and aligned, and thinking through what's realistic and not some wildly improbable scenario by which we might need a thing. It's really good to think about the ergonomics, as I've started to get older, I don't want to have quite such heavy bins, stacked up that I would have to move to get to certain items. And there's, the, organization of usefulness. That was the friend coming over and helping me figure out how to, organize my cabinets and, have a much more elegant solution, which feels amazing. So, such a fan of doing this work. Some of it is just a willingness to be really kind to yourself, set yourself up for success in every way you can, and then kind of embrace the suck and, just keep moving through, which honestly is a really good kind of human discipline where you can be like, I totally don't want to, and it's going to make me grumpy, but I'm going to do it anyway. And building that muscle, we don't want to overuse that muscle. We don't want to have that be the bedrock of our life all the time, but a judicious ability to have that be a muscle and something that we can deploy is really, really useful. And then supporting yourself in all the ways that are possible, I think, is also a really good investment. And being on the other side of this, I just feel so good about my space and what it feels like to be in it. And I'm loving all the things that are spontaneously and organically opening up for me. And it wasn't like it was horrible or, that I had closets with things falling on my head or it was overwhelming. But as someone who's very attuned to energy and working very dynamically and on an ongoing personal growth and transformation path, there's a really large impact to that experience of being really contemporary with my stuff and my space and having it be really clear that makes a big difference. So I hope that there's something here that will inspire you and help you to see things through, even if it really is a bit of an embrace the suck kind of process for you. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.